Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the early start here. But we have a long day ahead of us, so thank you for being here. Is there a motion to come into executive session?
Second.
So it's been moved by Senator Avard, seconded by Senator Gray. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's take up House Bill 1606. So Senator Sherman and I tried to bridge the gap that we had on this bill last week, which I hope is reflected in Amendment 1632. It changes the House Pass version, which is opt-in for every vaccine that's administered, to a one-time opt-in at the beginning. I think that was the intent of the sponsor. I've spoken with him. He was, well, I haven't spoken to him. I showed him the amendment, texted him the amendment, and I think he was good with the amendment. Now, there's been a question raised by Senator Sherman on line 13 about the second use of the opt-in consent. Tom, do you want to discuss that?
Yeah, so this was a blend of the House version, which passed, I believe unanimously or almost unanimously out of the House committee, and then the language that came from the department. And unfortunately, in line 13, it left in the words opt-in, which really doesn't make sense because it's an opt-out or opt-in coming from the House. So talking with the department, what we need to do is there's two different ways we can do this. Because it's defined as an opt-out or opt-in, we could scratch the whole line that says no patient's personal data shall be entered into the registry without the explicit written consent. We could scratch that whole thing, or we could just scratch the words opt-in, because that makes it confusing, because we've already said it's an opt-out or opt-in.
Right, so what I had just said to Senator Sherman is that if you just get rid of that last sentence regarding no patient's, you're still achieving. Am I okay? Okay, so if you just get rid of that last sentence, that makes sense. But if you change, if in line 13, if you change that to written opt-out, it doesn't make sense because you're requiring.
No, it's going to be written consent of the patient, which is
To
what we
Okay.
no, just no opt. Opt-in or opt-out is in line 11.
I think it's too confusing. I think you're achieving your goals, the goals of Senator Sherman and Senator Bradley, if you just do the first sentence starting on 10. You don't need the sentence, no patient's personal data. You don't need that. It's just confusing.
Well,
You're giving
I think it's
you're giving parents the option.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Senator Whitley. It would seem to me that you do want the personal data protection written into statute. Now, the question, and I would ask Representative Leon from the House, because I've tried to work with the House members as well as the department, if on line 13, opt-in is taken out. I mean, obviously, you have to opt in earlier in the prior sentence. So written consent to me means basically the same thing. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I think the whole sentence should be kept, but you wouldn't have a problem with dropping that opt-in in line 13. Okay. Okay.
So just so I'm clear, if we just write written consent, meaning they can't enter your information into the registry without written
That's what it would
consent.
mean.
So that is an opt-in.
Yes.
Actually,
It's
that
not,
is what we currently do. So when I gave vaccines for the booster clinic, every patient that walked through, you said, do you want to opt out? Every patient.
you asked them, right?
I asked them and I checked the box.
Right. But this is different. You were requiring written consent to go in. So you were changing
No,
that.
no,
That's
you
what
are,
this amendment does.
you are basically, rather than checking a box, you have a form instead of the box. We can ask the department.
Trish, go
You're
ahead.
requiring an extra step that we don't do now.
Not really.
You're requiring written consent to go in. Whereas now you check a box. You ask a question and you check a box. Here you're requiring written consent to go in.
It still is a documentation of a face-to-face encounter. So
Aren't we protecting the patient ultimately? I'm sorry I didn't raise my hand. I'm citing on the patient.
We're having a free-ranging discussion
I just
here.
want to
Go-
be clear about what we're doing. I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying, Senator Avard, but I just wanted to be clear about what we're
Let-
doing.
Why
and
don't
what
we hear
currently
from the
do.
department as to what actually happens now? Okay? Go
I'll shut
ahead.
up.
I'll-
Okay, we're on now. Good morning, everyone. Trish Tilley from the Division of Public Health.
Good morning, Anne Marie McCary, Immunization Section Chief.
So do you want, Emery, do you want to describe the process as it exists right now? Thank
Surely,
you.
surely. And it is more in line with what Senator Whitley is describing, excuse me. Right now, when a patient comes in for a vaccination, they're asking whether the patient wants to be involved with the IIS. And it's when a patient opts out and chooses not to participate that the written form gets completed for that documentation. If this is changed to a consent, written consent for each time that a person is newly coming into our practice, that is becoming an opt-in and is changing the way that things are done.
Yes. And, but to Senator Sherman's point, we are already having that conversation. So what changes is that there will be a new consent form, a new checkbox that has to be checked off. Again, we're thinking about opt out or opt in. What I was envisioning that might look like as we were trying to operationalize that is opposed to the form that needs to be completed for the opt out right now, for the very few people who choose to opt out, everyone will now need to check a box basically saying I'm in or I'm out. So that we have always stated that our current system is optimal because it is less burdensome on the providers and families can get the care that they need. And we can focus on the care of the vaccination versus the mechanics of signing boxes. However, I fully understand the need from Senator Avard and others that families want to be more engaged right now. One of the things, real core of this issue is we want to not make this so burdensome that our providers say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, and we're not participating in free vaccines for children. So that's the piece that I have to hold on this end, and the path we're trying to go find to go forward to what's acceptable for everybody in this room in order to engage consent and ensure that a process is not so crazy or burdensome that we're going to have providers they're going to opt out.
I think it would be safe to summarize, Ms. Tilley, that the department is supportive of the way that we're proceeding with this language.
If we are going to make a change,
Yes.
we are supportive. Again,
Thank you.
if we have to go, if that's the way that the body wants to go, I think this gets us close to it. I think we can strike that opt out of the sentence there just to make it clear. If that's line 12 and on line 13, if you want to strike opt in right there, that might make it a little bit cleaner. I have a little concern about written consent. We want to make sure we can do this electronically. I don't want to get hung up when we're doing rulemaking that we actually have to have a piece of paper. But those are the concerns we have. Anything you want to?
Can we say written or electronic?
I think that would be all right. Would that be all right to the House, written or electronic?
Yes, if it's documented in the medical record.
Yeah, okay. Electronic would be.
Yeah.
All right. Any further questions of the department? So, I'll read it. So, no patient's personal data such as name, address, date of birth, immunization, or vaccination information shall be entered into the registry without the explicit written or electronic consent of the patient or the patient's parent or guardian. Okay? Senator Avard has moved the amendment with that change. Is it seconded? Seconded by Senator Sherman. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to say, I appreciate the department's ability to thread the needle, but what I'm hearing from the department is that, if this policy change is going to make, and to be clear, we are now making a change to an affirmative opt-in. Okay, before we currently right now, parents are already given the option, but it remains an opt-out system. So we are now, even with this amendment that the department can live with, it is still a policy change. And it is a policy change that I can't support because I think current law already protects families' ability to opt out if they want to. They are given that option. But we are now going to be one of only 2 states that have this affirmative opt-in. So again, we're changing our current system, and every public health expert that I have spoken to says that this is making our vaccine registry less effective. So I just want to be clear about that. I think current law already protects parents, gives them the option. This change that we are going to be voting on is changing our system, and I can't support it because it's antithetical to public health.
Senator Sherman, then Senator Gray.
Respectfully, having participated in the process, I believe that functionally this will have little change in the process. And I would prefer to keep it as an opt-out, which I think is working well. But every single time we have somebody coming through the vaccine process and the registry process, we ask the question. So that's something that, having actually participated in it, I think it will not significantly change the system to do it this way, and it will address the concerns rather than losing the current system completely and going to a complete opt-in system. I think this is an improvement over the alternative. I would prefer to keep it the way it is now, but I think this is preferable over option C.
Okay, Senator Gray.
Thank you.
Given Senator Whitley's comments, we haven't reached consensus. And the reason I was willing to support the amendment as amended here in the committee was because I thought we had reached consensus. And if that's not the case, then I think that part of this is back off the table because Senator Whitley hasn't reached consensus yet. So either we reach consensus or we don't reach consensus, and that's where I am.
Senator Avard.
Mr. Chairman, I reached consensus.
Bless you, brother. All right, let me say a couple of things. And I'm going to speak as a parent, okay? First of all, I think the department has done a really good job of managing all of the conflicting issues coming out of the pandemic, okay? John, Trish, Abby, Marianne, Anne Marie. So I'm giving you some gold stars here, okay? Because this is hard. This trying to protect people's privacy, protect the public health, with all of the back and forth that has gone on. And there was a recent study that came out that judged how different states had managed through the pandemic, and we rated very well. Now, there were some economic issues that were there too, but there were also public health issues that were considered in that. So kudos to you. I happen to believe, and now I'm speaking as a parent, that the department's going to be able to manage this system pretty well, because I think you've heard the need of people to make sure that their privacy is protected. And that's been a long-ranging discussion. It's been bipartisan. The state even passed a constitutional amendment a couple of years ago, excuse me, led by former Representative Kirk. You folks understand that, so hats off to you. And I think you're going to manage this process pretty well. Now, I had 4 kids, have 4 kids, and man alive, trying to keep all those records that you have to keep for your kids, because, you know, anybody that's had kids, especially as they become older, and, you know, you think, oh, maybe they should keep some of their own records, and I still have all their vaccine records. I would definitely, if my kids were going to get a vaccination, I'd want to opt in. I would affirmatively say, thank you very much for letting me have the opportunity to opt in, but please keep my records so that I don't have to keep them. So I think you're going to do a great job of this. I think it's a reasonable path forward. I think it's unfortunate that Senator Whitley doesn't support it. I think that you are going to be able to protect the public health, but you're also going to protect the privacy. This is a good compromise, and I hope that all 5 of us can vote for it. So with that said, is there any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. 4.
No.
Right? And opposed?
Mhm.
All right, so the amendment passes 4-1. Is it moved? Ought to pass as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
So again, 4-1. All right. Senator Avard, you get the honors. All right. I had on my list that I think, given that we still have some time, that we can probably exec 4 other bills. Hopefully.
Can I just ask, that was a committee amendment to this amendment. Okay.
Yes. All right. Let's go with 1466. All right, this is the off-label use of prescription drugs. Senator Avard, do you move on to pass?
I move on to pass and I have an amendment.
All right, is there a second to the ought to pass?
Second.
All right. Yep.
And basically, I move 1402S. This bill is basically construction of chapter. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to legalize or constitute, condone, or authorize or approve of suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or euthanasia, or permit any affirmative or deliberative act or omission to end one's own life or to end the life of another than to be permitted by the natural process of dying. That's my amendment.
So the point of this amendment, Senator Avard, if I can ask the question, is for off-label drugs not to be legal to be utilized, or not legal,
For
maybe not the
suicide.
right word, but not to be the protections offered in 1466 for drugs that would be dispensed for assisted suicide.
That is correct.
Okay,
It's kind of simple, but it's just,
all right.
I was going to say, Senator Sherman, did you have an amendment? I have in my notes that an or needs to go to an and.
I do not have an amendment for the or to go to an and, but I would like to do a committee amendment when we get to that part.
is there a second on my amendment?
Second.
All right, so Senator Avard's amendment has been seconded by Senator Gray. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of Senator Avard's amendment 1402, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay, Senator Sherman.
I would like to add in, I think it's line 6, and line 15, and see if it's also in this last paragraph. Line 24. The informed consent, do you see that?
Yep.
I would want that informed consent approved by the board.
The
board
patient's informed consent
consent.
would be approved by the board.
The documented informed consent, that's a form. So it would be a form that would be approved by the board. The reason, let me just clarify that. Documented informed consent can be anything. But the concern here that was raised by the board was that that's so vague that you've taken away the first part by having an or in there, which is sound scientific medical evidence. So if there's going to be documented informed consent, that should be regulated. That should be a form that's approved by the board.
Is there anybody that in the audience that wants to comment on that?
What did,
Representative?
Thank you. Can I ask a clarifying question on that? Would it be approval of the form or approval after the form's been filled out?
Approval of the form,
If it's
just
a,
like other forms that we do.
rules?
as long as
Yeah,
it's,
per
it-
rules, it'd be in rules.
if it's the form that goes to everybody, I think that that makes a lot of sense and takes practice of medicine out of the legislature.
All right, so I think what we should do, if it's suitable to the House, and I thank you again, Representative, so let's have a second sentence that says, document informed consent, the board shall approve the consent form
This consent
referenced
form.
in this paragraph, something like that.
Shall improve the, just making it clear that they're approving the form, but
The
not
form.
the specific.
Right.
On a,
For rulemaking
the-
purposes?
that the form shall be approved before use or something like that, so that it makes it clear that it's the form and not the individual instance.
So we probably, in line 6, do you have a copy of the bill in front of you? Yeah. We probably should say document informed consent.
You could put in a parenthetical phrase that says, the form of which is approved by the board through rulemaking.
Informed consent on a document approved by the board through rulemaking?
But see, that's confusing.
Oh, okay.
That's why I think you need a sentence that just talks about,
The informed consent form shall be approved by the board through rulemaking.
yeah, I think that's the way
And we
to
just
do it. And it would
after
be after the word indication on line 7. Do you have the,
So it'd be after the word indication on line 7, after the word indication on line 16.
okay, let's get the sentence right, then we'll put in the 3 places.
I have one little comment.
You could have the sentence be the,
This is bureaucracy going amok, but that's all right. If we get a 5-0 vote on this, I'll
right.
take it.
the form for informed consent shall be approved by the board through rulemaking. Is that good?
Yes, I've sat on jail car for quite a while, and I've known that sometimes the rulemaking process people can drag their feet 1, 2, 3 years. So
Does it have to be through GelCar? Can it just be approved by the board?
That's fine with me.
It
Would,
just-
would the words "the standardized form for informed consent" make clear that it's the form itself and not
The
each use?
standardized form, yeah, that's a good,
That's fine.
Senator Gray?
Because there's so many mics on. I think if you start off with who's approving it first, and it can't be Gelcar, because Gelcar doesn't approve of anything. All right, it has to either say that it's in rules or approved by, or whatever, and then go on with the rest of the sentence that says, you know, that it is the form that you're
All
approving.
right, so here's what I would propose we do. On line 7, after the word indication, okay? The following sentence, the standardized form for informed consent shall be approved by the Board of Medicine. And there's no confusion.
And once you have that, Cam, it needs to be repeated in line 16 and in line 25.
And those relevant boards would be the nursing board and physician's assistant boards, clearly.
Physician assistant and board of medicine.
Oh, okay.
So it's just the nursing.
All right, so the last one should be in the nursing board, or one of them should be in the nursing board.
So I think in line 7, it's Board of Medicine, 16 is Board of Nursing, and then 25 goes back to the Board of Medicine.
Yes. All right, do we need to, Cam, you have that sentence? Okay,
I'll read it back just to be sure.
go ahead.
The standardized form for informed consent shall be approved by the Board of Medicine, Nursing, Medicine.
Right, in 3 places. Okay, everybody clear? So Senator Avard has moved that as an amendment. It's seconded by Senator Sherman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Okay. Senator Avard moves on to pass as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
We need a second.
Aye.
We need a second. We only had a motion.
It was seconded by Senator Gray, I'm sorry. I didn't say that. You caught me, Cam.
I didn't say it loud enough, Cam.
No, my ears are, not functioning. So seconded by Senator Gray. All in favor of ought to pass as amended? Say aye. Aye. Regular or consent? Everybody all right with consent?
It's fine.
Senator Gray gets the honors on this one.
You still have to actually vote on consent.
Aye.
Aye.
And-
Aye.
And no opposed on consent. Okay. All right. Let's do, House Bill 1345. I know Senator Whitley, you had an amendment. Senator Sherman, also had an amendment.
1345.
There's 2 amendments on 13.
Yep, I think, I would recognize, and I haven't had a chance to talk to either one of you, but a motion for interim study on this bill, would everybody be okay with that?
It'd be fine.
All right, Senator Avard, you want to make a motion? All right, seconded by Senator Gray. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, consent.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, I'll write this blurb. All right. Let's try to do, I don't know, somehow I lost my folder. It must be in my other folder back in the office. But I think we can do 1099.
Right. Did you get
All right, Senator Avard moves on to pass on 1099. This bill's pretty simple. It just says, I'm sorry, seconded by Senator Gray, that services cannot be denied by the department based on somebody not having a COVID vaccine.
I had in my notes that we needed a clarification from Director Lippman. Because we certainly don't want to do anything that
Do we have-
interferes with Medicaid.
John, if we have that amendment? If we don't, I'm happy to work on it.
I wasn't aware there was an amendment.
Senator Bradley,
Yes.
my apologies, my attention was distracted. What bill number are we?
1099.
1090. The department is actually, I did check in with Director Lippman, and I also was able to provide some level of feedback to some of the committee members, and the department is fine that the issues that we thought were there were somewhat a mistake, because the fact that the bill just has the introductory paragraph, but it doesn't show the exceptions that are in there for New Hampshire Hospital, once I brought that to the attention of the individual who had the concerns, it addressed the department's concerns. So we are fine with the bill proceeding as it came from the House.
Can I ask a question, though? I had asked Henry, was the concern was that some pediatric practices that take Medicaid do not see patients who are unvaccinated for non-medical reasons in order to protect their other patients. So my question was, would they no longer be able to do this, therefore no longer be able to take Medicaid patients if they continue to accept Medicaid? Would they no longer be able to do this, which is to have a requirement that all their patients be vaccinated if they can, medically, if they accept Medicaid? In other words, these providers would have to drop Medicaid. The response from Henry was, an amendment should be considered. John Williams can ask Senator Bradley to hold off on execing, so we may be able to get an amendment. So I don't know if you.
So,
talked
Senator
to
Bradley, if I
Henry.
can address that, in the category of looking at this bill, it is already currently in effect in law. It came as a result of HB 220. Working with Director Lippman, those providers are being paid. In the category of sleeping dogs, yes, that this is the type of thing that we think that you're fine with proceeding forward with the bill as passed by the House. Thank you so much.
It's fine.
Okay, so is there a motion of ought to pass?
It's already been made and moved and seconded.
Perfect. Thank you, Cam.
Can I just say something on this?
Yes, you may.
May I? Thank you for the grammar correction.
Unintentional, but you may.
That's how I heard
Remind
it
me,
too.
I can't remember my sixth grade grammar teacher, but I always
Can't
got
run
that
for
straight.
governor if you can't,
I know.
you know, spell.
Ooh,
Ouch.
yeah. So I opposed SB 220, and I don't think expanding that, was it HB or SB 220?
HB.
HB 220. I don't really favor expanding this because I don't really favor the underlying bill. So for that reason, I am going to oppose this, recognizing it's going to move through. But
Okay.
so that's
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no further discussion. All in favor of the motion of ought to pass, say aye. Aye. And opposed?
no.
Okay. Senator Avard gets the honors of taking this out. All right, given that the next hearing's gonna start in about 10 minutes, let's come out of exec session. I think the only other bills would generate quite a bit of discussion.
All of it friendly.
Of course.
Civil.
Of course. All right, so we've moved to come out of exec session and we'll be in recess to come back to begin the hearing on the speaker's bill, House Bill 1455 at 9, and we'll see you in 12 minutes. Thank you. Good morning again, everybody. Let's open the hearing on House Bill 1455 and recognize Speaker Packard. Before you begin, we want to thank you for your hospitality. It's you've been really gracious to this committee to allow us to use double rooms twice and Reps Hall last week, so thank you.
They are nice, aren't they? A little bit bigger than even when we were, in using the single rooms.
Senator Bradley is offering his office for any House meetings in the future.
Senator, I've been in his office. It isn't that big. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Representative Packard, Rockingham 5. First of all, I want to state this is not a anti-vax bill. I personally had my first vaccination back in January of 21, my second shot in February, and I took the booster when we had our facility here to boost back in December. So this isn't about the vaccine. This is about what I believe to be an illegal federal mandate, period. I do not believe the federal government, I don't care who's the president, what party it is, should be engaging in forcing mandates upon the people of something of this nature. And that's what this bill does. It says we will not comply with a mandate from the federal government. That to me is a violation of the Constitution. That's it. I just, this is something that's very, very, very dear to me. I absolutely do not believe that mandates work. I think they're counterproductive. And I think that this type of a mandate where they're threatening to have people fired if they don't comply with something they don't agree with is just wrong. And I'll leave it at that, because that's pretty much all this bill does.
Are there questions of the speaker? I just have one. A couple of people have reached out to me. Are you willing to work with me and the committee on potential amendment to make sure that we're not threatening Medicare and Medicaid funding?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that was never my intention, Senator. I mean, this is strictly, I mean, like I said, I don't care who the party is in power is or who the president is. I do not believe mandates like this are constitutional. I believe they violate the 10th Amendment. And like I say, this isn't anti-vaccine. This is anti-mandate.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I don't think that there are any further questions.
That was
go
too,
back and
that was too easy.
you can go back and visit my office if you want. Your office is nicer though. All right. Representative Leon is here, does not wish to speak. Representative Prout signed in support. Also does not wish to speak. Dr. York. I saw him here. Oh, I'm sorry. There he is. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. I'd like to just share some personal stories with you about how this mandate has affected members of my family. As the prior speaker has suggested, my son is a social worker at a very large mental health institution in New Hampshire. Back in September, president had announced that a mandate was coming for those companies that were receiving federal aids. And there was a mandate issued at his organization that said that those who are not vaccinated would not be able to continue to work. And that went on for several weeks before finally, just before Thanksgiving, my son was forced out of his job for not receiving a vaccine that was still experimental. It was very hard because he works with children and families, and he became very close to some of these kids and parents. And we all are well aware of the crisis that mental health is rained upon with children, especially during this time, with forced lockdowns and mask mandates and this, that, and the other thing. So he had to let his clients know that he was no longer going to be able to counsel them. So he took that pretty hard. And for a person who works in mental health, he's suffering himself from this loss of his job. He's considering moving out of state because the state does not welcome any resistance to a mandated vaccine. Also related to the family, I have nephew number 1 who works in Massachusetts. His company mandated the vaccine. He's leaving his job. His wife was a former medical oncologist at a very large medical institution in Massachusetts. She as well had to leave her job because there was a mandate in this very large institution. And she's leaving New England. She and her husband are relocating to Montana, where they found a safe haven for work without an overriding mandate. They have a 2-year-old beautiful daughter who's going to be leaving her grandmother and relatives. Who knows how long it will be before we see all these people again. Nephew number 2 and his spouse leaving Massachusetts for the mandate and relocating to Utah. So this is the effect of a mandate, which in itself violates several tenets of the Nuremberg Code. This is kind of what's happening. It's destroying families locally, and it's causing people to leave New Hampshire. So I'm asking you please to consider this support of this bill, because a mandate really is an attempt to coerce people to get an experimental jab. So please support this bill. Thank you.
Other questions of Dr. York? Thank you again, Doctor. Good to see you. Julie Smith. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, committee. Julie Smith from Nashua. I'm here to speak on behalf of a neighbor who was unable to be here today. Her name is Allison Dyer, and these are her words. I am one of your New Hampshire residents that continues to implore members of our New Hampshire legislative bodies to stand up and to really hear the people, your people, those who elected you to serve their interests here and in the live free or die state. I have written, called, emailed, and come to various hearings to speak. I need you to hear us. I have lived in New Hampshire all my life, work here, Was married here, gave birth to a beautiful baby girl here, well, 7-year-old now. But my life is here because I love what New Hampshire has to offer and what New Hampshire has afforded to me and my family. I am the daughter of a nurse whose career has spanned 47 years, a nurse who was faced with ending her career, not for retirement, not for performance, but for a vaccine mandate, for a virus she contracted and recovered from in the early days of the pandemic. My mother, a nurse of 47 years, a woman who has dedicated her life to the caring for others, spent months in limbo waiting for approval of a medical exemption from Human Resources, not a physician, not her personal doctor, but a non-clinical group of adjudicators. Don't you have any idea of the stress, strain, and physical toll that type of scenario weighs on a devoted, lifelong nurse? Add in, the providers in general are being pressured not to sign any exemptions, including her own provider, that would not sign her medical exemption, despite the adverse, very scary vaccination and immunization history she has. So our employers and this administration have been given license to be judge, jury, and executioner of our ability to provide for our families as well as our bodies. I myself have worked in healthcare for 15 years. I lost my job at Dartmouth Hitchcock on October 8th, 2021. I was there for 14 years and 8 as a remote-only employee doing prior authorizations. I, like my mother, had COVID. I, too, have antibodies a full 16 months later. My medical exemption was denied despite my documented history of severe allergic reactions, despite a letter from my primary care stating I should not receive the vaccine, despite the antibody test, and despite my plea of abject fear that as a mother to a young child with my history of very visceral and horrific reactions to immunizations, was afraid to die. Dartmouth sent me my denial for the COVID vaccine, my approval for the flu vaccine exemption, and my termination paperwork. 14 years gone. And the kicker is 3 days after I was terminated for not complying with the vaccination because of my natural immunity meant nothing, despite the history has always told us prior infections and antibodies, the Red Cross called me to ask if I would donate more blood as a universal donor with COVID antibodies. My natural immunity was good enough to donate blood to help persons recover from COVID, but not good enough to keep my job. It is important that all health decisions are made voluntarily. This is called voluntary consent. It is against the law to force anyone into accepting a treatment or a medical procedure against their will. If a person feels they must receive a medical intervention to avoid losing their job, their place at university, or having their freedom of movement taken away from them, then they have been coerced, and the injection, immunization, or medical procedure becomes a criminal act of assault, and informed consent has been violated. These mandates and the inaction of our elected officials to protect the people of our state swore an oath to protect and serve led to chaos. Employers are so fearful to not be able to report business. Excuse me. Employers are so fearful to not be able to report business-wide 99% vaccination rate, they are willing to terminate healthcare workers for their entire careers, pandemic aside, have been unwavering in their care of all of us. When have we had press announcements of business flu vaccine rates? I tried to look. I couldn't find any major announcements about the compliance of flu from any institutions back in 2010 when they began mandating the flu vaccine in healthcare setting. The vaccine had been out and FDA approved since 2007, and the nasal flu had been out since 2003. 3 whole years of data that people had to review before making the decision to be vaccinated. It's April 19th, 2022, and the COVID vaccine under emergency use has been available to the general public for less than 2 years still, and the FDA approval for the Comirnaty only came in August, so less than 8 months. Why is it okay for the flu vaccine to allow people time to review the data and decide, but now we are being forced to choose between taking care of our families, our careers for less than 2 years worth of real-time data? Why does New Hampshire's own laws allow for a natural immunity as an exemption to vaccination? Is that because we used to use history and historical data prior to COVID? And while COVID-19 is a newer virus, it would seem that everything that came before in history, from mask studies to natural immunity, was just thrown out the proverbial window. And despite the FDA advisory committee stating the quote, "We were never going to learn about how safe the vaccine is until we start giving it," one of our very own New Hampshire representatives put in HB 1633 to require the COVID vaccine in order to attend public school. Free, fair, and appropriate education, but only if you vaccinate your child and hope it's safe. The National Institute of Health is quietly studying the effects of the vaccine on women's menstrual cycles. On August 30th, 2021, on the NIH website, listed in their items of interest section that they have only been given a grant of $1.67 million to study the correlation of COVID vaccine to changes in women's menstrual cycles, heavier than usual bleeding, and other menstrual changes. The study states on January 20th, 2022, future research will assess whether the COVID vaccine affects other aspects of the menstrual cycle, such as the amount of bleeding, menstrual symptoms, such as pain, mood changes, or fertility. But you want me, as a mother and a woman, to give this to my 7-year-old daughter to be able to live in a day-to-day society or attend school knowing I could potentially be altering her ovaries and causing a permanent or damaging hormonal change to her body at 7 years old. COVID has a 99% chance of survival. Also, should the study of the NIH be doing enough for women in the workforce medically exempt from the vaccine at this time? If HB 1455 and HB 1210 do not pass, this legislative body will force families to make incredibly detrimental and injurious decisions to vaccinate themselves and their children, or leave the public school systems and lose their ability to feed, shelter, and care for themselves and their families. Lastly, anyone who has critical thinking brain or individual thought could see this writing on the wall for all of this when they said 2 weeks to slow the spread. That we would have been on the fast track to losing liberty to live life as we choose. This is a false choice between public health and individual freedom here. We have accepted this as binary, that invited in the politicians to politicize it. Public health, in other words, is inconsistent with the right to be left alone. Of all the risk factors for disease and injury, it would seem now today that freedom is most pernicious. So here we are almost 3 years later. So with this committee in the medical freedom bills looking to come through this Senate body during this session, I am again writing today to ask that you return what is rightfully ours as citizens of America: our parental, not political rights, our individual autonomy, our right to choose what medical decisions are best for our health, and to restore New Hampshire to live the live free or die state that we all knew and once loved. And I'd like to add to that in my own words, and to go on record, that I'd like to see these two bills, HB 1210 and HB 1455, treated with the same expedited priority as HB 1130 was last Thursday. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Louise Spencer, please.
Hi, thank you, Senator Bradley. Hello, committee. My name is Louise Spencer, and I'm from Concord, New Hampshire. I am co-founder of a group called the Kent Street Coalition, which is a all-volunteer group of citizen activists, grassroots activists, and advocates. I'm here opposed to this bill, And I just want to share that when I hear people come up and say that you need to do your job representing the people, there are a lot of people who also oppose this bill. So, and there are a lot of people who face consequences by being forced to go into settings where people are not vaccinated. As much as we can hear stories about people who have adverse consequences because they're required to be vaccinated, there are many, many more stories of people who are immunocompromised or face health consequences when they have to go for medical treatment or to school or other settings. So the other point that I wanted to make was that I wish that we could get back to a place where it was less always about my rights, my needs, and that we cared a little bit more about each other as a community and did things for one another that would help all of us. And it seems like that gets lost in this discussion all the time about masks and vaccines, that it's rarely looking at how can I be a good neighbor? How can I be a good citizen? I do recognize that there are, we heard the story from the last person who testified on another person's behalf. I think there are ways we can look at, prior infection, people's personal histories if they have adverse reactions to vaccines, those sorts of things. We don't need a mandate that is just a blanket mandate, and I think we could be wiser in the way that we approach this. But I don't think we would even need to be talking about mandates if we had more of that sense of kind of public concern for one another that seems to have been more present in the past and seems to be sorely lacking now. So I wish that we could be in a place where we didn't have to go toward mandates. And it saddens me that it comes down to that. So thank you for taking my testimony.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Deborah Chabowski signed up, but I'm not sure signed up to speak. Kate Horgan.
Good morning, Chairman Bradley and members of the committee. My name is Kate Horgan. I serve as the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Association of Counties, and the association is opposed to this bill as it is written. This bill would put federal funds at risk. Rockingham County alone stands to lose $30 million in federal funding just for their nursing home. It would also, as we read it, put state surveyors in a tough spot, being unable to enforce and collect data on the vaccine mandate for our nursing home employees. I would also point out that our survey of the 11 county nursing homes, very few people have chosen to leave as a result of the mandate. We've been able to accommodate the medical and the religious exemptions for the majority of our employees. I think at last count, it was less than 10% of our roughly 3,000 to 4,000 employees that we have just in the nursing home. I do believe that DHHS has an amendment that they are presenting that John Williams just handed me that we would support and would address all of our concerns. But I'm happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Any questions of Ms. Horgan?
Thank you.
Very much. Paula Minahan. He'll be next. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Paula Minahan, Senior Vice President, State Government Relations for the New Hampshire Hospital Association, representing all our hospitals. We do have concerns about House Bill 1455. As you know, the hospitals in New Hampshire announced last August, prior to the Biden administration's vaccine policy announcements, a consensus statement in support of requiring our healthcare workforce to be vaccinated against COVID-19 in order to protect our the health and safety of our patients, our staff, and our communities. The hospitals have been very flexible in complying with all relevant state and federal guidelines, including offering medical and religious exemptions. As presented, House Bill 1455 would not interfere with the ability of private employers, including hospitals, from making these decisions about the health and safety protocols that are appropriate for employees, customers, patients, and organizations. The U.S. Supreme Court recently did find that the federal vaccine requirement for healthcare facilities that participate in Medicare and Medicaid programs is constitutional and can proceed. Even though New Hampshire hospitals have already implemented COVID vaccine requirements, they must also comply with the federal requirement. And that is where our concern is with this bill, because hospitals, as you know, participate in Medicaid and Medicare program, they must be certified to do so. And many hospitals in New Hampshire, including all our critical access hospitals, go through the New Hampshire DHHS, Bureau of Licensing and Certification. Some use the Joint Commission, but not our critical access hospitals. So our question is, how would 1455 affect the ability of the Bureau of Licensing and Certification to conduct their review and certification of New Hampshire's critical access hospitals from maintaining the eligibility in Medicaid and Medicare program? Obviously, participation in that program is essential to the mission of our hospitals to serve their communities. And we are concerned about how that would, how if passed as is, 1455 would add additional costs, because there is a cost associated with using other than the department's bureau agency. So that is our concern. And we do appreciate that the bill would not interfere with the ability of private employers, including hospitals, from making decisions about the health and safety protocols as appropriate for their employees, customers, patients, and organizations. But we're just concerned about, like I said, our critical access hospitals. So thank you for the opportunity to present.
Questions of Ms. Minahan? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Williams and Abby Rogers from the department. Good morning, folks. How are you? So I believe you have a potential amendment?
Senator Bradley, we do. For the record, John Williams, the Director of Legislative Affairs for the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, and with me.
Abby Rogers, Legislative Liaison.
And Senator Bradley, we want to thank you for the opportunity to coming here today to speak to you and the committee on HB 1455. We look very much forward to working with this committee, with the House Speaker, as well as the House leadership, where the bill originated from in the Health Policy Committee. Our goal here is to tread very lightly. We certainly understand and respect where the House position on the bill is coming from, and therefore not taking a position on the bill, but at least pointing out to address very narrowly the department's concerns, as well as those of you heard from the New Hampshire Association of Counties that relates to county nursing facilities, to create a specific carve-out or exception to protect the Medicaid dollars that could be at risk. So with that said, the department would, has suggested for your consideration, and also working again collaboratively with the House, who just received the amendment out of total courtesy to them, that they certainly need to mull it over and consider it for their very important feedback. But what we would seek to do is, first off, is to look at the placement of this very important legislation. Currently, it is housed under a new chapter, RSA 141K, relative to public health sovereignty. Given that the scope of this actually is around labor and labor-related issues, we would just respectfully suggest the consideration of having it placed as a new chapter under 275 colon I. That would be a new chapter, and just striking the word public and exchanging that for employee health sovereignty. And it just makes it clear if it goes well in terms of placement under the Department of Labor statutes, as well as specifically identifying the importance of employee health sovereignty. Not changing any of the other language of the bill other than the section headings needing to be realigned with this new chapter for under 275 colon I. If you look at the bill as it passed by the House as introduced, if you go between lines 20 and 21, we would respectfully suggest that the committee consider the inclusion of a new Roman 3. And you should have the document that Mr. Lapine, I believe, might have distributed to committee at this point. And you'll see that it just adds a new Roman 3, which would read as follows. Paragraphs 1 and 2 of this chapter shall not apply to any healthcare facility, provider, or contractor subject to a federal vaccine requirement, including the survey and certification policies and procedures under the authority of the Department of Health and Human Services, Bureau of Licensing and Certification. This language has been reviewed by legal counsel, general counsel for the department, and we are confident that this would protect the Medicaid dollars while also preserving the underlying bill that has come to you. And with that, I think the other speakers did a tremendously good job, Ms. Minahan and also Ms. Horgan, in terms of specifics as related to the survey requirements, and just want to thank them for that testimony.
Questions of Mr. Williams? Senator Sherman.
Just one to clarify the position of the department. Did you say the department is neutral, opposed, or in favor of this bill as introduced?
We are at this stage here not taking a position on the bill, so respectfully, I think the box that I had checked off this morning reflects that, and also I qualified that with the fact that the department
Yes,
would
it
bring an
does.
amendment, to address the department's concerns, which is what we're doing here today.
Very good. Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none. John and Abby are the last people that have signed up to speak. Anyone else for a first time? Okay. I'm going to close the hearing. We're going to take a 1-minute break, and then we'll open the hearing on 12:10.
It's not as bad as I thought. Only page and a half.
I'm gonna- Okay, good morning once again, everybody. Let's open the hearing on House Bill 1210 and recognize our colleague from the House, Representative Lang. How are you?
Very good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. My name is Representative Tim Lang. I represent Belknap 4. I am currently the chairman of the House Fish and Game Committee. I also serve on the Ways and Means Committee as well as the JALCAR Committee. I'm the prime sponsor of House Bill 1210. I introduced for your consideration. 1210 is probably the most misunderstood bill of this entire session, easily. What this bill does is it only puts in the statute basically the procedures that most businesses already do. It just reaffirms it for the citizens that these are the procedures that businesses have to go through. Currently, pre-COVID, before everything got crazy, businesses would routinely, hospitals would routinely get requests for medical and religious exemptions. And they would routinely grant those exemptions, and if necessary, create a reasonable accommodation to protect the citizens and their business model. This was the standard before COVID. This is how we did it. There was generally no qualification for religious exemption when you filed it. You filled out the form, you submitted it to HR. HR took the form, decided what reasonable accommodations, most of which they already know what they were, whether you're in a healthcare setting, it would be masking, and or maybe you were transferred. But that was the reasonable accommodation they negotiated with the employee. That's all this does, this bill. This bill does add one thing. It adds the right of conscience. And the question is going to be why we add that. So in our Constitution, the New Hampshire Constitution, everyone points to Article 1 when they say this is unreasonable, Tim, because you have to take Article 1 into account in the last sentence in Article 1, which says instituted for the general good. So the general good's the most important thing. We have to do that. And had the framers of the New Hampshire Constitution stopped there, I'd say, okay, maybe you're right. However, they didn't. They went on to talk about natural rights and that all men have certain natural and essential inherent rights. Among them are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring possession and protecting property, and in a word, of seeking and obtaining happiness. Equality of rights under this law shall not be denied or abridged by the state on account of race, creed, color, sex, or natural origin. But then you go all the way down to Section 4, which is Article 4, that says right of conscience unalienable. I had to go look up the word unalienable. I didn't know exactly what the definition was. And the definition of unalienable is that which not be given or taken away, which means the state can't give this right to anybody. The state can't take this right away from anybody. That's the definition of unalienable. Among the natural rights, some are, by their very nature, unalienable because no equivalent can be given or received for them. Of this kind of right is the rights of conscience. So when I had to go look up what is a right of conscience, and when I was amazed to find out that Senator Sherman here is covered by it, is HHS has a whole provision that protects doctors from the right of conscience, for the purpose of right of conscience, to not do certain procedures based on moral or religious beliefs. So the federal government on the HHS website specifically says that. So what we give our doctors, and it says conscientious protections apply to healthcare providers who refuse to perform, accommodate, or assist with certain healthcare services on religious or moral grounds. That's on the government HHS website. So they are more than willing to extend the right of conscience to doctors. I want to extend that to our citizens who are just as entitled to it, specifically because of our Article 4 Constitution provisions. This isn't about vaccine mandates. This is strictly about procedure. I was subject to a vaccine mandate. My businesses wanted me to go get not only did I have to declare that I wanted a vaccine mandate, and the truth of the matter is I just didn't want to release my medical data to them. I didn't think it was any of their business. If they wanted to put in a reasonable accommodation because I refused, I was more than willing to do that. But I just didn't want to release my medical data. It had no impact on my ability. I'm an IT guy. I can program a router, program a switch. I can fix equipment without a vaccine. It doesn't make my job any better or any worse. I understand there are provisions for businesses under a business model that want to protect their workers and protect their workforce. So in my instance, my reasonable accommodation was I tested every time before I went on site. I accepted that. I felt it was reasonable for the business model, but that was the accommodation that we came to an agreement on. But the form they originally gave me, when we talked about exemptions, they sent me a religious form and they wanted me to go get my pastor's signature and a title and quote for the chapter and verse of the Bible that said why I was entitled to this religious exemption. The idea that businesses are going to measure my spirituality or anybody's spirituality should be chilling to see if they're entitled to an exemption, to have them reach into that. Again, on the medical side, if I'm asking for it because I can't get the vaccine due to a vaccination due to a medical exemption, and we'll use myocarditis or some other reason why I can't get it, again, it does not affect my ability to perform the job. And I tell them, I'm asking for a medical exemption. I'm willing to take reasonable accommodations. Why do the business care what my back end is? If I'm not asking them for a $1,000 stand-up desk or some other provision, I'm just asking for what the reasonable accommodation is to protect the business and protect the coworkers that this business wants to enjoy. Again, the normal procedure we did way before COVID, that's all this bill does. It puts in reasonable provisions that were normally done by business that takes the craziness of COVID that happened and how businesses through federal mandates and federal coercion through money were forced into setting up mandates. It takes that out of the way, takes the government out of the way, allows a simple, streamlined provision. And again, I consider this a business-friendly bill. Is that a business, because of the state law, will no longer have to measure your spirituality, which means that they're not going to get a Civil Rights Act violation against them for the purposes of you denied my my religious belief claim, and I'm going to sue you under the American Rights Act or medical claim, or Americans for Disability Act. Again, the only comes down to is whether or not the accommodation that was reached was reasonable. That would be the only grounds that a business would have to fight on for this. So again, I consider this an extremely business-friendly bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions of Representative Lang? Seeing none.
Thank you,
Very
Senators.
much. So, just for members of the audience, we have a number of people who have signed up to speak. This is the last hearing of the day. However, because there's so many people that have signed up to speak, I am going to ask everybody, and I'll do my best to enforce it, a 5-minute limit. Okay? Representative Leon. And I reserve the right to reduce the limit if we're running out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Representative Erica Leon from Rockingham 6. I come before you today on this bill because, as Representative Lang said, it's one of the most misunderstood bills in the state, and thank goodness we're not Florida. This body and this committee have already looked at 2 different bills that have to do with exemptions surrounding vaccines. 1345 has language for school children that streamlines the religious exemption, just doing away with the notary. Our childhood vaccines are actually our most efficacious vaccines that we have today. I wish that the COVID vaccine did as good of a job of stopping transmission as our childhood vaccines do, but unfortunately it doesn't. We need to look at that actual reasonable protection and understand just how much of a benefit there is. We do have data that says that it will make it better for you if you get COVID and you're vaccinated. I think that's a really strong reason to get it. But we're seeing many people who are already vaccinated getting it, spreading it, and unfortunately, it doesn't do what we hope it would have done. We also have House Bill 1604 that this committee heard. That has language for the exemptions for the state facilities that have the CMS mandates, and it had language that that we believe will work in order to allow them to comply with any valid and enforceable Medicare or Medicaid condition of payment. That might be something to look to make sure that we're also not putting our critical access hospitals and others at risk. We do need to balance the fact that we've accepted all these federal dollars to run our state and our lives, and we have to deal with the consequences of that, even if that is saying that some people have less of a right to object to a medical treatment. Last of all, second to last, businesses aren't trained in assessing religious or medical exemptions. I think the point that unless the medical exemption has something to do with your job, your employer doesn't necessarily need to know why you get a medical exemption. I know I personally hid pregnancies from my employers because I worked remotely and I was able to manage my life. I didn't do insurance through them, and it was quite frankly none of their business about when I was having a child if it didn't impact what I was doing. Why would they need to know my specific reason for an exemption if for a medical reason? And finally, I really, really think that conflating the COVID vaccine with these longstanding childhood vaccines is really dangerous. I think the more that we try and force the COVID vaccine into everybody, the less of a chance we have, the more that people will start questioning everything. And I don't think that's good. I think we've had a great success in reducing these childhood diseases, and the last thing I want to do is sow distrust. So instead of force, let's get back to talking about the actual benefits of the vaccine, the fact that it might make it a lot easier on you when you catch COVID, and let's focus on the benefits. Stop forcing it, and let's give our employers and our post-secondary institutions the same exemptions we offer for school children. Thank you.
Questions of Representative Leon? Okay, thank you. Dr. York, welcome back.
Gary York, Hopkinton, New Hampshire. Thank you for having me back. I echo the sentiments of the previous speakers, plural, And I'd like to stress the very important legislation that Representative Lang has brought forward that is of conscientious objection. And as he rightfully says, this is an inalienable right for all of us. My son, who I spoke of before, was not able to obtain a religious exemption because he has no religion, as do many. He was not able to get a medical exemption, perfectly healthy. He was worried about the vaccine. He wanted to stay healthy. If we have a conscientious objection option that cannot be questioned, that cannot be taken away, he would be working today in his job that he loved and helping many people in New Hampshire, including children. So please help support this bill. It's very important, the conscientious objection. Don't take that away from us. Thank you.
Questions of Dr. York? Seeing none. Thank you, sir. Ms. Smith again, Julie Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie Smith from Nashua again. Speaking for another Nashua resident, Nurse Mary Sullivan. In November of 2021, I was terminated for noncompliance to a vaccine mandate. The reason given was my unvaccinated status placed an undue burden on the hospital where I was employed. I had to submit an exemption and 3 appeals, which were all denied. Fellow nurses who had had medical exemptions for over 20 years were all denied their exemptions. The hospital sent an email of how delighted they were that they were 100% compliant with the vaccine mandate. Since I had worked at this facility for 10 years, I still have good friends who work there. End of December, early January, they were telling me about all the staff out with COVID throughout the hospital. The facility had to drop from running 20 OR to running 3 OR rooms due to staffing issues. I worked all through COVID. I was sent to work in ICU where I had not worked in over 20 years. Although surgical services is considered critical care area, it is nothing like ICU. But I went there to serve my community. After the hospital terminated hundreds of non-vaccinated, they hired federal and travel nurses. Many of those temporary staff were unvaccinated. I was unable to collect unemployment benefits. I have worked since I was 16 years old. I put myself through college and nursing school, working numerous jobs. I graduated with no debt. Being terminated due to my unvaccinated status, placing undue burdens on hospital was financially and emotionally difficult. Mandating the vaccine actually put an undue burden on the staff and on the community. There were not enough staff to care for patients when all the vaccinated staff contracted COVID. I know that this is not quite lined up with the testimonies of the language of this bill, the conscientious objection, but this is not my first time speaking at a committee hearing, and I know that we are not allowed to speak twice for the same bill. I do think these 2 bills make a nice cocktail to fight for freedom, and I thank you for the time.
Questions of Ms. Smith? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Padmore.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Padmore. I'm the Director of Advocacy with the New Hampshire Medical Society. I'm here to speak in opposition for House Bill 1210. I'd like to start by reading testimony that you've received by email from Dr. Viking Hedberg, who was unable to testify this morning. I am a pediatrician who has practiced in our great state for over 20 years, and I would like to voice my strong opposition to HB 1210. Having a conscientious objection for all vaccines would nullify any requirement for vaccines, which are a dramatic success story in decreasing the spread of contagious and dangerous infections. For example, chickenpox is life-threatening for a child with leukemia. The chickenpox vaccine is very safe and effective, and requiring the chickenpox vaccine for school children dramatically reduces the chance of exposure for others at school and makes school much safer for a child with leukemia to attend. Similarly, other required vaccines protect not just the immunized, but those that have contact with such as in school or in healthcare settings. I strongly urge the committee to reject this bill that would make our schools and hospitals significantly less safe. I'll also just conclude by noting that a personal conscience exemption put into statute would jeopardize the money that our state and our hospitals receive from the federal government, will put us out of compliance with CMS guidelines. I think we'll hear probably from some speakers after myself who can speak to that a little bit more in detail. But that conflict, it would jeopardize that money that goes towards treating our most vulnerable populations in the state. So I would ask that this committee reject that bill for all the reasons that I've just stated, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions of Mr. Padmore? Will you make sure that Cam has that email? That
I will,
cited?
yes. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Okey doke. Paula Minahan, and are you going to testify with her, Steve?
I think he's gonna leave me.
Happy to do so. Good morning again.
I have a packet, but I will not read from the packet. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Paula Minahan, Senior Vice President with the New Hampshire Hospital Association, representing all our hospitals. We are opposed to House Bill 1210. As stated, this would prevent private employers that receive public funds from federal and state government from requiring vaccines of their employees as a condition of employment without offering exemptions for medical, religious, or conscientious objection. And 1210 would also prevent hospitals that provide clinical rotations for training of a wide variety of clinicians from requiring those students adhere to the evidence-based policies and protocols that have been established for the health and safety of their patients, workforce, students that are training there. Essentially, 1210 would render moot any requirement that an employer has determined in the best interest of those they serve by simply saying no to the vaccine requirement on the grounds of conscientious objection declaration. This is in direct conflict with the CMS requirement, which I have provided an attachment to documents from CMS that have been updated earlier this month that clarifies that all certified Medicare and Medicaid certified providers, including hospitals, that must comply with vaccine requirements of all staff. The guidance, which was issued, like I said, 2 weeks ago, further clarifies the vaccine enforcement, and I will read for you so that you don't have to flip through this. In the first memo with the CMS logo, if you go to the bottom of page 2, vaccination enforcement surveying for compliance, that states, the sole enforcement remedy for non-compliance for hospitals and certain other acute and continuing care providers is termination. However, CMS' primary goal is to bring healthcare facilities into compliance. Termination would generally occur only after providing a facility with the opportunity to make corrections and come into compliance. That is a very significant statement, and again, it was just updated a couple weeks ago. In other words, hospitals in New Hampshire must comply with the CMS vaccine requirements to ensure that Medicare and Medicaid participation is not put in jeopardy. This is where the conscientious objection is a problem that is not a consideration under Medicare and Medicaid guidelines. And again, if 1210 were to be passed, it could put funding at risk for hospitals, Medicare and Medicaid. In 2020, the last full year of available data, that amounted to $2.3 billion for hospitals alone. That is, again, that would jeopardize our hospitals throughout New Hampshire. Let's see. Those are really my primary statements. So thank you. We are opposed to 1210, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Sherman.
Thanks, Paula. You know, we talk about on this bill, the last bill, the cost. But there's a reason why they penalize us, right?
Right.
Is it not important for people to be vaccinated to protect human health and life? And is it not, in terms of personal freedom, a protection of those who cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons? Isn't that the reason why, the other reason why we require this and put fines on it? Because number one, it has been shown to be effective in reducing death and illness. And two, it has been shown to be effective in making sure that those who can't be vaccinated aren't exposed unnecessarily to illness that will kill them. Isn't that why we do this? It's not, these aren't fines that are just put out there. They're fines that are put out there to protect human life. Isn't that what we're doing?
Yes. And as you stated, to be vaccinated, it reduces, while it may not eliminate the infection, it reduces severe illness and hospitalization. And that is obviously our concern. And that is why CMS, I believe, has imposed these pretty significant requirements to ensure that, in fact, patients are protected and our most vulnerable are protected. So yes, I agree, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Whitley. Any further questions? I'm sure you'll make yourself available to the committee if
Yes.
we need to speak with you further.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DiNapoli, please. New Hampshire Nurses Association. Good morning. How are you? Good.
Pam DiNapoli, I'm a nurse. I'm the executive director of the New Hampshire Nurses Association. So I did email you my testimony, and I'm just going to do some key points for the committee. So what Ms. Minahan just talked about is the financial impact. So I just want to underscore that, the importance of you considering the financial impact of this bill. And essentially what one person told me was that it essentially underfunds the healthcare system. So I think that that's important. But the 3 points that I want to make are around human cost. So the first is really just repetitive of what Dr. Sherman just said. It defies vaccine science. So any expansion of exemptions is going to decrease the overall efficacy for the population. So it increases the risk for a few who have medical or religious exemptions, and these individuals also have rights. These individuals who can't get vaccinated are then vulnerable by the people who choose not to be vaccinated. My second point is that we know that vaccines are safe and prevent vaccine-preventable diseases. And I think the important part of this bill is that it's not a COVID vaccine bill. It provides exemptions for all disease-preventable illnesses like measles, mumps, chickenpox, meningitis. And like Mr. Padmore's testimony says, that these are vaccine preventable diseases, and any outbreaks in the community are at risk. And we've seen, especially in the college population, as immunity wanes over time, we've needed to revaccinate our college population because we've seen things like meningitis outbreaks, measles outbreaks in these congregate settings. So we really need to consider that the human cost to not preventing these diseases are loss of time from work. If you remember when you had chickenpox, you couldn't go to school, your parents couldn't go to work. Kids really don't get chickenpox anymore. As adults, we didn't have the chickenpox vaccine. Now we get shingles. So we can prevent that through the shingles vaccine. So it's a cascade effect that I think we have to consider. There's also the possibility of post-disease sequelae. We think of these childhood illnesses as not severe. They can cause death, deafness, male sterility, mobility issues, like I said, shingles. So we have to consider if you're in a college, but so I spent 20 years teaching at UNH in the nursing department. And one of the first things that a parent told me was, if my child is vaccinated against meningitis, would he be able to play beer pong at the fraternity? And I was like, I had never thought of it that way, but I think that that's a good point. So consider college students and their risky behavior and how vaccines could play a small part in prevention of that. And the last thing that what Ms. Minahan said was that it has the potential to impact academic progress for healthcare students. So when our healthcare students go into organizations, they're there by contract. They're essentially guests of an organization, and the guests will tell them what they need. So for years, we've had our students, our nursing students, our PT students, everybody has to abide by that contract. So they provide for us at the beginning of every semester their vaccine records or their titers. So some students have lost their vaccine records, so they get titers just to demonstrate their immunity. We have over 20 years, I can probably think of 5 students who have ever asked for an exemption. And it's difficult to give a student an exemption from a clinical hour when you're required to have 1080 hours of clinical practice before you can get your license. So those are difficult situations, but they're counseled before they come in. When you come to our nursing department, you're going to need these vaccinations. So consider whether or not you're going to come. The other thing that recently, probably within the last 4 years, we required flu vaccine. Never had a student say that they weren't going to have the flu vaccine. So remember that this covers all vaccines. So basically, our association values evidence-based practice. This is not consistent with evidence-based practice. And overall, we don't think it's a very good bill, and we would encourage you to oppose it. Thank you.
Question?
Just a couple. Thank you for testifying. How many nurses are there in the Nurses Association?
Right now, we have about 1,300.
And we've heard testimony, albeit kind of hearsay, read to us by somebody else about nurses who oppose the vaccine. And also we've had state reps who are nurses who oppose the vaccine. What is the position of the Nurses Association representing the 1,300 nurses on vaccines in general and specifically on this bill, just to be clear?
We strongly oppose this bill, and nurses believe in vaccine safety and vaccine science.
Thank you.
And to clarify, the 1,300 who are members because they believe in evidence-based practice.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would recognize now Joseph Mirsoff. Good morning, sir. Can you use the microphone, sir? Thank you.
Okay, I'm a researcher. I'm a mathematician. I've used probability and statistics all my life. I've served in politics once. I've lived in New Hampshire for 9 years. It turns out that a lot of people are misinformed about the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. This chart shows you New Hampshire's results for non-long-term care facility residents. So these are the people who could get shots beginning in March of last year. Okay, and these are by age group. These are how many died in the first year of COVID, where there were no vaccines for these people, and the second year of COVID, when they all had the benefit of vaccines. And you can see that in every age group, more people died in the second year when they had the alleged benefit of vaccines than died in the first year, and by huge margins. I mean, the worst ones are the 40-year-olds, where 6 of them died in the first year. Now, this is all updated to yesterday. This morning, I updated it from New Hampshire HHS website. The 40-year-olds, 6 of them died in the first year. 47 have died in the second year. You can see that it's 5 times as many for 30-year-olds and 50-year-olds. It's 3 times as many for 60-year-olds. Not even the 80-year-olds are bearing any benefit. 1.8 times as many die. Now, this is not counting people in nursing homes where the situation is a little different and it's complicated, but I can explain that as well also. There is no reason to think that these vaccines are safe and effective. We've just been barraged, and with misinformation from mainstream media. Mainstream media has gotten promotion money for these vaccines. $1 billion was given from the National Congress, and so various hundreds. It was a Freedom of Information request by the Blaze, and hundreds of them got significant promotion money. I don't know if that affects their behavior, but it certainly looks like it does. I've written about 12 articles this year. Each of them criticizes our responses to COVID, government responses, the medical leadership responses, and they are either in Granite Rock or in the Keene Sentinel. So you can find these. They're all good. They will all inform you better than the misinformation, which is so accepted by our institutions, our medical, and our government institutions. I'd be happy to take questions. If you read this article, Truth and Reconciliation, it will fill you in on the various ways that the various institutions have failed us. But there's no reason to force people to get a medical treatment which on balance harms them more than helps them. And that's
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Are there any questions?
Doctor?
Seeing none.
No?
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
Dave Juve from the BIA.
Chair, would you allow Andrea Chatfield, who's also
Of course.
up here with me?
Yep.
2 for the price of 1.
2 for the price of 1. We're loving that.
Thank you, Chairman Bradley and senators on the committee. For the record, my name is Dave Juve. I'm a Senior Vice President with the Business and Industry Association. And with me today is Andrea Chatfield. She is one of the state's finest employment law attorneys with Cook Little in Manchester. And she also serves on the HR State Council for New Hampshire. We're going to confine our testimony purely to the impacts this bill would have on employers. We're not going to talk about the efficacy of the vaccine. We're not going to talk about the tremendous negative fiscal impact this would have on New Hampshire and hospitals if it went through. We're just going to talk about how this impacts employers. And I'd like to start out by respectfully disagreeing with the bill's sponsor. This is not the most misunderstood bill of this legislation. If we oppose certain aspects of this bill, it doesn't mean we misunderstand it. It means we understand it too clearly. And I would also suggest, as an organization that speaks on behalf of employers and businesses, this is not business-friendly legislation. I want to talk first of all about the creation of the new exemption relating to conscientious objection. As previous testifiers have said, that renders moot any vaccine mandate that may currently exist in the workplace. But to illustrate how wildly inconsistent that is with health and safety, regulations in the workplace, I want to give you two illustrations of things you won't see today. You won't see a sign that says no shirt, no shoes, no service, unless you have a conscientious objection, because that's your inalienable right. You also won't see a sign that says employees must wash after using the facilities unless you have a conscientious objection, because that's your inalienable right. This bill clearly is taking away the ability for employers to do what they think is in the best interest of their employees and customers. Now, I'd like to refer to 3 areas that are especially problematic for employers. The first is on line 19 of the bill, and it says such request for exemption shall be granted. That is taking away something that employers currently have the right to do, which is to investigate a request for exemption and determine whether it's legitimate and grant it or not grant it. So please understand, you are telling employers in this legislation how to best run their businesses. The second area is starting on line 20, the employer may then work with the employee to see if an agreement for a reasonable accommodation can be reached. That's unnecessary in this bill. Employees and employers already have the ability to enter into agreements of reasonable accommodation. You don't need to pass a law giving them the ability to do something they already have the ability to do. But the third area is the most important. And I can't give you the line to refer to in this bill because it's not in the bill. And that is, what happens if a reasonable accommodation cannot be reached? The bill is silent on that. What happens? Does the employee continue to work there anyway? Does the employer terminate the employee, terminate employment? If they do, I want you to consider what happens next. And what happens next is likely to be a wrongful termination lawsuit. Because here's what's the employee, the terminated employee, is going to say. I requested an exemption. The employer granted me the exemption and then fired me because I took the exemption that they granted. If that doesn't sound like the basis of a lawsuit, I'm not sure what is. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I would like to turn it over to Andrea Chatfield now to fill in the blanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. I hope that I can get 5 minutes on behalf of the HR State Council. So I'd like to first...
He only took 3, so
Oh,
you're
okay.
golden.
Does that give me 7? I'll try to keep it to 5. But I think it's what you don't hear a lot about, and why I'm here, is the perspective of the HR person, the human resources director, manager, employee relations person that is dealing with these laws and has to implement them. We're on the front lines of that. So the HR State Council represents over 1,000 HR professionals just in the state of New Hampshire. And it's really important that you understand what their perspective would be, because they're the ones that would have to deal with this. I also respectfully disagree with the sponsor of this bill when he describes the process as very simply: grant the exemption, give a reasonable accommodation. That's not how the law works for a reasonable accommodation. A reasonable accommodation is somebody saying, I need an exception. I need you, employer, to treat me more favorably and differently than you do the majority of your other employees. Whether it be a workplace policy, whether it be waiving job functions because I can't do them because of a medical issue, whether it's a work schedule change because of my religious beliefs or practices. I need you to treat me more favorably than everybody else. That does entitle the employer to say, why? It does entitle, and actually it's expected of the employer in the reasonable accommodation provisions that are in the federal law and the state law, to ask the employee, I need information to make sure you are entitled to a reasonable accommodation based upon your protected status that you're claiming. If it's a disability, what can we get a note from your doctor stating that you have an impairment and that you need this type of accommodation? Is it a sincerely held religious belief? And that's the wording from the federal laws that would entitle someone to a reasonable accommodation. So yes, the employer does have the right and the obligation to ask for that type of information. This bill completely strips that right away from employers and does not let the employer fulfill its obligation to ensure that the person is entitled to be treated more favorably than anyone else by an accommodation. And when you're saying, I want an exemption from a vaccine mandate, that's a big ask. Employers implement vaccine mandates for a lot of good reasons because it directly relates to their obligation to provide a safe and healthy workplace for their employees and the constituents that they serve. They're not doing it to trample people's rights. They're not doing it to be intrusive. I work with these employers that have implemented vaccine mandates. I work with the HR professionals that deal with requests for reasonable accommodation. Those are challenging situations. And in this, and through COVID, it was very challenging. But every request for a reasonable accommodation has to be made on an individualized assessment, and it requires a fair amount of what we call the interactive process. And that is so that you can actually come up with the right reasonable accommodation. Sometimes you need to know the disability, the medical condition, in order to understand what accommodation does need to be provided. So this bill would take all that away. It does not understand the reasonable accommodation process. And it does not appreciate the fact that employers implement vaccine mandates not to be selfish, not to be reckless, but they're thinking about the health and safety of the many, of their workplace, which they're obligated to provide a safe and healthy workplace. And if, based on public officials and public experts' recommendations about vaccines, if a business owner feels in his conscience or her conscience, I need to make sure my workforce is vaccinated, what about that? What about the personal conscience or the needs of the employees who maybe are immune compromised? What about the rights of the constituents that are being served? I'll give you one final example. Before there was any, my mother was in a nursing home the last few months of her life. She was fighting a very bad infection as well as dementia. It was at a time when the flu vaccine was not mandated. We had a meeting, my sister and I, with the head nurse of this floor that my mother was on, and we were talking about the challenges of providing continuity of care with my mother to determine when she would need intervention. And the head nurse mentioned that a lot of her staff were out with the flu and that they were trying to bring in contract workers. And I asked her, well, what proportion of your staff right now are contract workers? 70%. 70% of her staff on my mother's floor were contract workers, if they could fill the positions. Within 2 weeks, my mother died. Her infection progressed to the point she seemed very out of it. But without that continuity of care, they thought it was the dementia, not the infection, until my sister raised the alarm to say, we need to get her to a hospital. Unfortunately, she died within 48 hours of getting to the hospital. Believe me, if I ever go into a nursing home, I want to make darn sure that all the nurses and all the staff have the flu vaccine, have the vaccines against these diseases. So that is what I want to give you as a personal example. But why, again, from an HR perspective, this law does not serve the needs of the employers, and it does go against the laws about reasonable accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chatfield. Yes, Senator Sherman, one question.
Yeah, this is, thank you for taking my question. Thank you for your testimony. If this bill goes into effect and employers are not allowed, somebody says, I have a medical exemption, you're not allowed to investigate it with this bill. You just have to trust the employee. Or any of the three reasons that are covered in this bill. Is there any liability on the employer? They're required to have a safe workplace. Suppose it's a vaccine and there's an outbreak. Suppose it's one of the employer says you have to have shingles vaccine, or let's use COVID, for example. and there's an outbreak that occurs and it's traced back to the person who wasn't vaccinated, is the employer still liable for having not provided a safe workplace? Does this law protect them from liability?
It certainly doesn't protect them from any liability. As a matter of fact, I think it puts a person such as an HR director in an untenable position. Do they risk compromising health and safety by letting unvaccinated people work? Or do they deny any particular accommodation the employee wants and risk being sued? So yeah, there could be liability if let's say it's a young patient gets COVID and it's traced back to an unvaccinated therapist. Then yeah, the parents could easily sue that therapy provider. And it also could, if there is an outbreak within a workplace, OSHA might consider that an unsafe workplace and say, why were you not properly protecting people from this disease, and impose fines. So it really leaves a lot of vulnerability of employers on compromising workplace safety. Can I also make a point that this law does not necessarily, it does not allow the employer to know whether the exemption request is for a medical, religious, or conscientious objection. They just have to submit that one statement that says, I have requested an exemption because of a medical, religious, or personal conscience reason. Doesn't even require the employee to distinguish. That makes the reasonable accommodation process much more difficult. Is it a medical condition that will be temporary, so maybe we can accommodate you this way? Is it a religious exemption? And in a lot of times, what we were seeing in COVID, which was very challenging to do in processing reasonable accommodation requests, we were seeing people for religious reasons saying that they would not even wear a mask because of their religious convictions. That made it very difficult to find a reasonable accommodation. And I can show you the form letters that my employers, my clients were getting saying, not only is the vaccine against my beliefs, but masking is also against my beliefs.
Senator Abar.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. In the prime sponsor came up with well, basically quoted the Article 4 of the Constitution, and how that the doctors are protected for moral and religious, and he wanted to extend that to the citizens, basically under the Equal Protection Clause and all that kind of stuff. Why wouldn't this apply to the natural citizens as well?
It applies to natural citizens when it comes to government intervention. Private employers, non-government employers are not subject to requirements for constitutional things like due process or freedom of speech. That private employment for the vast majority of employers in the state is an at-will arrangement, meaning you work, your job is, you work for an employer at the will of both the employer and employee. It is not a realm in which we're talking about constitutional protections. However, that's why we have employment discrimination statutes that do protect people from protected legal statuses that Congress and the legislature have designated, such as race, religion, gender, disability. And in the area of religion and disability, the laws go one step further and say not only can you not discriminate, but you must provide reasonable accommodation. So those are protected areas. They're discrete. The personal conscientious objection is not defined anywhere in employment laws, and is not something that normally would be part of a private employment arrangement, which is at the will. If a person has a personal objection to any condition of employment, they are free to leave. This employer can set the conditions of employment, a private employer. A private employer, like I said, is not, those due process rights don't apply. It's an at-will employment relationship. The other problem you have here is that the law, it has no sense of proportionality. It says any penny you receive in public money requires you to put this law in place. Well, you might have an employer that only sells to government agencies on a very isolated area or incidences, but yet if they take one penny of money, this law really makes vaccine mandates meaningless for employment purposes.
See no
Sinking
further.
in.
I know it does take a while to realize what at will employment means. And really, I mean, I have a personal objection to lots of things. I wouldn't work for those types of employers. And if I have a personal objection to something that again, this is not just an employer saying something arbitrarily. A vaccine mandate is put in place because the employer believes that's an effective way to keep a safe and healthy workplace. That's the employer's prerogative. That's the employee's right, and obligation to do. And it should be up to the employers to the best way they feel they can do that.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Kate Horgan, Association of Counties.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair. My name is Kate Horgan. I serve as the Executive Director for the New Hampshire Association of Counties, which is all of your elected and appointed officials at county government level. The association is in opposition to House Bill 1210, and to save time, I will just echo the comments of Ms. Minahan on the CMS guidelines for documentation, and I will be extremely brief in my comments. This bill will put county nursing homes in an impossible situation. They will have to choose whether they're going to follow state guidelines or federal guidelines. And if they choose to follow the state guidelines, they will lose federal funding. I will also point out that the private nursing homes receive funds from the counties and the state. Therefore, they could lose their funding if the counties lose their funding, because we will not have the funds to support the long-term care system. You will be putting the entire long-term care system at risk if you pass this bill as is. This bill is not ready for passage, and we would urge you to vote inexpedient to legislate. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Louise Spencer, please.
Hi again, and thank you once again for taking my testimony. My name is Louise Spencer from Concord, New Hampshire, and I am here speaking against this bill. Representative Lang said that he thought it was the most misunderstood bill of the session. I would say that it's one of the most dangerous bills of the session, because this is in reference to all vaccines. And we know that vaccines work. And we know that for them to work, they often, for contagious diseases, we need the majority of the population, the vast majority of the population, to be vaccinated. I'm not old enough to have lived through the polio scare. In fact, I'm one of those who was blessed by the fact that people discovered that there was a vaccine discovered, and that people actually lined up and waited for hours to get the vaccine to protect themselves and to protect their communities. I am old enough, though, to remember when the German measles vaccine came online. And again, we lined up at school, we got our vaccines, and we understood that this was not just to protect ourselves, but to protect other people. And I had a very dramatic experience of that as a child, in that there was a young woman, a young girl actually, in the neighborhood her mother had gotten pregnant with German measles, had gotten German measles when she was pregnant. And this young child in utero was caused severe developmental delays for this child. This person, the pregnant mother, had no way of knowing, as she was walking around in the community, who she might be exposed to. And the risk would go down dramatically once we had a widespread vaccination program. My own daughter, at 3 months, got whooping cough from exposure before they realized that we needed to have booster shots for whooping cough. She was exposed to a teenager who had gotten whooping cough. She had been vaccinated younger, but had not received a booster. And my daughter nearly died from whooping cough. Again, just an exposure in the community. The whole point of having these vaccination programs, which are proven effective, is to reduce the risk to vulnerable people in our communities. And as to the conscientious objection clause, I just would like to say that that's something to be invoked in a very serious and sacred way, and not just willy-nilly. I really have a concern about kind of this broad approach that you can say you don't want to wear a mask or you don't want to get a vaccination because of this, because you have a conscientious objection that you don't need to in any way give any proof of the validity or seriousness of that objection. I'm a Quaker by background. I know the long history of Quakers who have sought conscientious objection so that they would not violate their religious beliefs around killing. Often when they did invoke that, maybe many of you remember Don Booth, he invoked his right to conscientious objection during World War II, but he also then served many years in a camp for his beliefs, and there are consequences and responsibilities that come with the rights that are being invoked. And I just think that this bill removes any of that sense of responsibility. And so for that reason, I'm very opposed to this bill. I think it's a very dangerous bill, and I would urge this committee to ITL it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rudy Ogden, New Hampshire Department of Labor. How are you?
Good morning. I'll be brief. I just wanted to clarify from the department's position. We, of course, wouldn't be speaking to the policy, but from the practical considerations, namely, we would agree with the statement that as presented, the proposed legislation would say that an exemption shall be granted. From the department's perspective, if an exemption was not granted, the department would consider that a violation of this law as put forward. We understand that there is then the follow-on sentence saying that the parties could engage in reasonable accommodations, but that is only after saying that the exemption should be granted. The department has been asked, well, what would we do in such scenarios? We would consider that a violation if there is not an exemption granted, or if exemption is granted, the parties cannot come to terms, and then the employer says you have to leave. We would consider that in practice not granting the exemption and a violation. We would not have the ability or authority to restore the individual affected to employment, but we would consider it a violation with potential civil penalties to the employer. So I just want to make that clear.
Senator Avard.
Real quick, did you discuss this with the House when this was being passed in the House?
Yes, we testified at the House relative to this statement about, we were asked how would we weigh out reasonable accommodations, and we said, well, the fact that the legislation says shall be granted makes that matter somewhat moot. Of course, if the parties did come to a reasonable accommodation, as was said earlier, that can already happen. They can already work that out. But of course, this saying that the exemption shall be granted would require that the person not get the vaccination, they be exempted from any such mandate.
Senator Sherman.
Hi, Rudy. Thank you for coming today. The question that I asked the attorney, the human resources attorney, you all you collect some of the reporting for OSHA, and isn't that correct in the Department of Labor? Is that part of the job you do? So workplace safety and those kind of things?
We do workplace safety for public employers, and then there are certain injury reportings that we provide to OSHA.
So the actual reporting of workplace safety for a private employer would be Federal?
Federal, correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Rudy. Deborah Jabowoski. Okay. Deborah Sear. Good morning. Yep.
Try that again. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding HB 1210 relative to exemptions from vaccine mandates. I'm Debbie Skiri. I'm the president of New Hampshire College and University Council. And although many of you may know of NHCUC, I'll just quickly say it's a nonprofit consortium of public and private institutions of higher education in our state. And these institutions are recognized and highly regarded for their outstanding teaching, research, and community service activities. And they serve as major centers of activity that are vital to the economic development of the community and of our state. I'd like to share a letter, and it's being circulated, signed by 20 of New Hampshire's college and university presidents on behalf of their public and private 2- and 4-year institutions, urging you to recommend HB 1210 inexpedient to legislate. House Bill 1210, as written, would eliminate the college and university's ability to follow the current guidelines established by the American College Health Association, which includes vaccines like meningitis, MMR, etc. These guidelines were established long before COVID was part of our daily life, and they provide our campuses with standards based on established public health principles and local laws. The American College Health Association has been around for about 100 years. It works with colleges across the country. It covers about 20 million students on developing vaccine policies that work on campuses and really fit within the 24-hour nature of the campus. By that, I mean really the unique nature of higher institutions where students spend lots of time together in dormitories, in activities, dining halls, classes. We can go on and on. Mechanisms for students to opt out of these requirements for a documented medical reason or a sincerely held religious belief are already embedded in these policies. And while we can make reasonable accommodations for students who opt out under these established exemptions, we are concerned that the low bar envisioned by HB 1210 could degrade the community health benefits of immunization efforts and strain ability to manage exemptions and housing and other activities to protect all of our students. Again, trying to balance out those two needs. HB 1210 will disrupt the successful practices that are currently in place and could jeopardize the health of the entire campus community. And for these reasons, we urge you to recommend HB 1210 inexpedient to legislate, and really appreciate your time today, and very happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sear. Are there questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Gilmore. And I believe you checked off that the Nashua Chamber is opposing the bill. Okie doke. Somehow I assumed as a former senator you just want to say something. Kate Fry.
Thank you. Sorry, Kate Fry from New Futures, Vice President of Advocacy. You have my written testimony. Many points were covered. I'm just going to tell a personal story since that seems to be popular today. I have a daughter who is a freshman in college this year, and she has been consistently sick since January. She's had a sinus infection, then she got mono, and now she has the flu. And all of her friends have all those things too. I'm sure my daughter has not gotten that from beer pong. I just want to clarify it. But college kids are college kids. The good news is she hasn't had COVID. She hasn't had meningitis because those things are vaccine preventable. What she has had is not, except for the flu. She swears now she will always get the flu vaccine after this round. But she hasn't had those other things, thank God, nor have her friends. And that's because, as you heard earlier, colleges and universities have very strict guidelines about childhood vaccines and other requirements, and there are no conscientious exemptions. And so rates in colleges and universities are traditionally very high, thank God, because we avoid these previously eradicated diseases in many cases. If you add a conscientious exemption, I guarantee you that those rates will go down. We've seen that. I just had a handout where anytime you add a personal or conscientious exemption, your vaccine rates go down and these diseases are increased. I urge you to vote ITL on this particular bill with that in mind. And I also wanted to clarify is that one of the sponsors said that this bill would bring in line workplace vaccine requirements with the childhood vaccine requirements. And I think that's incorrect because there's no conscientious exemption with childhood vaccines. So I just wanted to point that out. And I asked the committee to vote ITL on this bill.
Thank you very much, Kate. Questions? Seeing none. Okay. Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Alex Katrubis. I'm here to strongly oppose this bill on behalf of companies that conduct business with the public sector. Government at all levels needs strong vendors and partners because without them, we'd have no Medicaid program, we'd have no DD services, we'd have no mental health services, there'd be no liquor on the store shelves, there'd be no lottery, there'd be no scheduling software or health insurance for the state employees. Government funds to businesses are not a charity. It's not a gift. These are business arrangements to buy goods or services that public agencies cannot or do not want to do for themselves. And they're based upon budgets that are crafted by officials at the local level or at the state level. This committee's passed an adult dental benefit for Medicaid many, many times. I feel like every year we're here doing the same thing over and over again. Hopefully it'll finally happen this term. But the providers who are going to conduct those cleanings, the dentists that are going to work in the program, they're not going to be public employees. They're going to be private dentists, private hygienists. And if they want to participate in this program, they're going to be subjected to the regulations in this bill. It's going to be another barrier to getting the adult dental network built. The governor has said the state government cannot infringe on the rights of private businesses by telling a private entity who to hire and fire. He's also said even if he doesn't agree, there are limits to government overreach. So why are companies that assist state and local governments in such a critical way being subjected to the regulations in this bill? What is the rationale for the two different standards? I feel that this is a really poorly worded and ambiguous bill. I think it was mentioned earlier. Any dollar amount, any form, grant, an invoice, a contract. If a municipality or the county or the state bought anything at Home Depot, Amazon, they'd be pulled into this bill. I think that's a pretty broad reach. Is the Department of Labor going to investigate every dollar that a municipality spends? Because those businesses, if they do any type of business of any level, they would be pulled into this bill. I mean, how is that going to be enforced? It is going to be enforced fairly. The day of the vote on this bill in the House Labor Committee, one of the members who voted for the bill said the following, and I quote, "We did not make this apply for private employers." This is after the vote. On this committee, It is our job not to get into the employer and employee relationships whenever possible. Now, this is someone who voted for the bill. Obviously, when you read the bill, it fails on both of those points. It certainly does apply to private employers because merely receiving public funds does not make a private company a public employer. And it certainly does put the state between the employer and employee relationship. So for all those reasons and many more, we feel that this bill is an attack on business, it's an attack on public health, it's wrong, and you should ITL it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Other than the department, is there anybody else who has not signed up and wishes to speak? Okay, John and Abby, welcome back.
Good morning, Senator Bradley, members of the committee. I'm Abby Rogers, Legislative Liaison for the Division of Public Health Services.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anne Marie McCurry. I'm the Immunization Section Chief Department.
We're here to oppose the bill today. Anne Marie's going to have some comments from immunization.
We'll try to keep this brief. Thank you very much. As others have indicated, this bill not only applies to COVID vaccine, but all vaccinations. The department is in opposition of the addition of the conscientious objection, as this will decrease our vaccination rates and place New Hampshire's residents at increased risk of vaccine-preventable disease, disability, and death. New Hampshire colleges and universities that have students in close proximity in dorms currently require certain vaccines, including meningococcal vaccine. Bacterial meningitis is extremely contagious and can cause serious neurological complications and death. Allowing students to be conscientiously exempt from this requirement could cause an outbreak of this serious and preventable disease on college campuses. This is especially concerning for students who are immunocompromised or have underlying conditions that prevent them from becoming vaccinated themselves. As amended, the department's understanding of this bill would also prevent the employers such as New Hampshire Hospital and Glencliff Home from requiring immunizations as a condition of employment or clinical placement, thereby preventing these facilities from protecting those who are receiving services from many diseases, as has been mentioned by others. So I'll keep my comments brief and we'll turn this back to Abby.
Great. Thank you, Anne Marie. We just wanted to echo the concerns already mentioned by Paula Minahan and Michael Padmore around potential loss of accreditation, and also the potential loss of accreditation is lost as the billions of dollars in Medicaid and Medicare funds to state medical facilities. We, have serious concerns about that. That's been addressed. Just wanted to reiterate that the department's goals are to have safe, thoughtful, and effective vaccination policy. We feel that conscientious objection does not fit into that and thus oppose the bill. Thank you.
Are there questions? Seeing none. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Okay. I am going to close the hearing on House Bill 1210. What's your pleasure? We have a long day tomorrow. I thought this hearing might go on a little longer than anticipated. I think we have to be out of the room no later than noon. We could go back into executive session and take up a couple of bills potentially, or we could just wait till next week.
I just have to go to a house here.
Then I think, all right, we'll be in recess until 10 past, how long?
We could.
One bill for 10 minutes?
Well, if we're not gonna have a lot of discussion on 11:31, we could do that right now. But that's up to you guys. That's the mask bill. Fine? Okay. Is there a motion to go into executive session? All right. Let us take up. All those in favor, thank you. Senator Gray? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're in executive session. And we will take up House Bill 1131. And I have an amendment. The bill passed by the House had a section, 2 sections at the end of the bill that dealt with penalty provisions. My amendment strikes those out. If you have the House passed bill, it strikes out lines 14 through 22. By doing that, it moves Roman numeral 1, the definition of facial covering, into the body of the bill. The department has told me that, because I've worked with the language on them, that the fact that in the amendment on line 9 or is required by some other section of law does not undermine their authority under RSA 141C.
I move on to pass in anticipation of moving the amendment.
Second.
Okay.
I move the amendment. Well, I'll second. Yeah, I'll move the amendment.
And I'll second that.
Okay.
1658.
It would help if you had a bill and the amendment together. So looking at the bill as passed by the House, lines 14 and 20, 14 through 22 are deleted. Those are the penalty sections. Roman 2 is if somebody's aggrieved by a violation, it says what they can do. That's not necessary. Roman 3, in my opinion, puts an educator in between a school board and the state law, and I don't think that is necessary either. So the amendment, Senator Sherman, keeps the first part of the bill, which is, if you're looking at the amended bill by the House, lines 1 through 7 intact, but starting on line 8 through 13, that's the definition, if you will, of facial covering. It brings it into the body of the bill because I learned something yesterday when, and Senator Gray told me about this, I had never known this. When you only have one Roman numeral as opposed to 2 or 3 or 4 or more, it just goes into the body of the bill. So it's sort of not a grammar lesson, but a lesson in how OLS writes their documents. That's what the amendment does. But again, I think, and you saw Mr. Williams nod, or is required by some other section of law, allows the authority that the department has under 141C to remain intact.
Mr. Chair? So I think, for the purposes of this amendment, the fact that it deletes the penalty sections, I appreciate that. I think those are pretty over the top and egregious. So for the purposes of the deletion of those penalty sections, I can support this amendment.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 I move on to pass as amended.
Wait a minute, I have to, Cam's like nodding. I
Oh,
have
is
to
it?
go all opposed to the amendment.
Oh. Okay.
No one. All right, now, Senator Avard,
I move on to pass as amended.
seconded by
actually already been done, but I.
by Senator Gray. Is there any further discussion? Uh-oh, here we go. All right, Senator Whitley.
Uh-oh, he says before he
Uh-oh.
calls on us.
Well, the reason I said uh-oh is you're interfering with Senator Sherman's testimony that
No,
happens in 5
I'm good.
minutes.
I'm good.
Okay.
Jenny's on it.
So, this is just not something that I can support for a lot of different reasons. The first being, we talk a lot about local control. Like, this very clearly takes away local control. We have school boards that are volunteers. They work every single day, you know, on a volunteer basis to determine what's best for their communities. We are taking away their ability to determine what's best for their communities. That's first and foremost. Also, like, I just need to say again, you know, we talk a lot about how COVID has been politicized, but we know that in this situation, you know, if we look to all the major medical associations, they recommend universal indoor masking, K through 12 schools under certain conditions. And there has been flexibility. My son has been masked in school. He's been not masked in school. I will say when he was unmasked in school is when he got COVID, right? At the end, he's been fully vaccinated, but, he got sick the second the mask mandate was lifted. So masks work. We need to do what's best for our communities. Luckily, he was vaccinated, so he remained healthy. And, you know, I just feel like we also need to think about, I spent my career representing children and adults with disabilities. You know, taking away this ability to protect kids with disabilities is a non-starter for me. And also, you know, denying children with disabilities a safe learning environment, that's potentially violates federal law. Again, can't support that. So for those reasons, I can't support this bill.
Okay.
See, it was quick.
Senator Sherman.
And I'll be quick as well. Fundamentally, we heard testimony that masks weren't effective. That's not true. There is, in fact, when we heard that testimony, the person who gave that testimony said, "Don't believe doctors." You know, it's false. He did advocate for something that was correct, which is really improving ventilation systems. Well, look at the schools in our state. Do they all have state-of-the-art ventilation systems? No. So what do we have as an option when we know that there's a prevalence of COVID or any other disease that is airborne? Say it's SARS. You know, one that will kill, or Ebola, it will kill. This would block it. This would block the ability for a community to respond. Elected officials who are accountable, it would block them from being able to do what's best for those children, protect them, protect the public health of not only the children, the administrators, the teachers. And the only other option is shut down the school. And what did we learn from COVID? We learned that that should be the last option. Fundamentally, this takes away local control. It takes away the ability of local elected officials to look at the science, look at the data in their community, and respond. If the parents don't like it, they have a right to run for school board and vote out the school board. But what we're doing here is we're saying forevermore, no matter what the situation is, and oh, by the way, we have avian flu virus in our livestock right now in New Hampshire. Suppose we get that virus that is very deadly. This takes away one of the arrows in our quiver, a major arrow in our quiver. We don't have systems that the fellow who testified from environmental, we don't have those systems in place in New Hampshire. We do have the ability to mask. And with those masks, we have the ability to save the lives of our children, keep our schools open, protect our teachers, protect our administrators. And what we've seen with COVID is, in the most part, people are acting in good faith based on good science and listening to the parents and trying to do the right thing. And I don't think we can ask more of our school boards. So I'm glad we amended this, but I'm going to oppose the bill as amended. Thank you.
Senator Avard.
Real quickly, just with regards to local control, I differ with my colleagues. I believe this actually supports local control in that you're empowering the parents to make the decision for their children. If they want their children to go to school with a mask on, this gives them that authority. And if they feel that it would be detrimental to their children, this puts the power back in the parents in their hands. And I think that is one of the primary things that I think I need to point out. Also, that the children, I think it's extremely unnatural for them to for the last couple of years to be wearing these masks. Their learning ability has suffered as a direct result of that. The facial recognition, that was also part of the testimony, that it's detrimental to them psychologically, and I think the effectiveness is still it's questionable in that. So with that, I'm definitely going to be supporting this. But just with regards to the local control, I don't think you can get any more local than the authority of the parents. They should be the final say. And that's my humble opinion. So,
Senator Gray, anything to add?
Sir, I would like
Okay, briefly.
Local control is already provided to parents through our elected school boards. That's what it's there for. This takes away local control, all of it. It takes away the elected body to control what's happening and respond locally. That leaves us with only one ability to respond, and that's statewide. That's not local control. Secondly, masks are effective. I've worn them in procedures. I've worn them all my career. They are effective. I don't know where that data comes from, but it's not true. Third, there is nothing more detrimental to a child than closing the school. And if you want to guarantee closure of school if we have another surge or outbreak, that's what's going to happen when you can't mask and you can't protect teachers and you can't protect administrators and you can't protect the other children. That was quick.
All right, I would just say a couple of things. The way the House passed this bill to us, on line 7, it says a policy that requires. There is nothing that prevents a recommendation. Obviously, the way this language is written, parents would have to be involved in that decision. I think that's appropriate. And lastly, I would reiterate and appreciate the way the House drafted this and well, Mr. Williams didn't say this, but he nodded when I said it. Nothing undermines their authority under 141C. I think that's important to maintain that authority. So with that, I think we'll call the question. All right, so the motion is ought to pass as amended. All in favor say aye. Aye. And opposed? Okey doke. Senator Gray, you get the honors on this one. All right. I'm going to work with Cam on the time for next Wednesday. We have no hearings. We have 4 bills left to exec. I was supposed to go see the doctor that morning, Senator Sherman.
I'll see you.
A different doctor. No, a different doctor. So I'm going to try to maintain that appointment because it's hard to get appointments. So the timing may be a little bit later than we would normally start at 9 o'clock. So as long as we're not too pontificating, I think we can manage. Okay? Thank you. Is it seconded? All right. We're out of exec. All in favor, say aye. And a motion to adjourn. Senator Avard makes it. Seconded by Senator Whitley. All in favor, say aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Hang on one sec. Cam may have an extra copy of it, but what do I do with it?